So, a single claim from a former US president has basically thrown a huge wrench into global energy politics. We're talking about Donald Trump, who says India's prime minister promised to stop buying Russian oil. Now, if that's true, it's a massive deal. So, what's the real story here? Let's dig in.
Okay, so here it is, the exact quote that kicked this whole thing off. Trump is on the record saying he got a personal assurance from PM Modi that India would cut off its Russian oil purchases. I mean, a promise like that between two world leaders, that would signal a gigantic shift in global alliances. So our job now is to figure out what's fact and what's fiction.
To really get to the bottom of this, here's our game plan. We'll start with Trump's statement itself and this so-called promise. Then we're going to follow the money and look at the actual import data. But the numbers hide a pretty interesting twist, which will lead us to the real reason for what's going on. From there, we'll dive into India's official policy and unpack its really complex diplomatic balancing act.
All right, first things first, let's set the stage. Because a statement like this doesn't just come out of nowhere. To really get why this claim about India was met with, let's say, a healthy dose of skepticism, you've got to see it as part of a much larger pattern.
I mean, think about it. We've heard things like misnaming Thailand Thailand, or calling Nepal and Bhutan nipple and button, or even claiming to have stopped a fight between Azerbaijan and Albania, two countries that weren't even fighting in the first place. So, this track record is exactly why a claim about some secret promise from India immediately raises red flags and makes you want to see the hard evidence. So with all that context in mind, let's zoom in on the specific promise that's at the heart of this whole thing. The key here, and this is really important, is the wording. Trump didn't just say India should stop. He claimed he was given a personal assurance that India would stop, and he even described it as a process. Now that implies a major policy shift, a direct commitment from one world leader to another. It's a very big claim. Okay, now this is where things get really, really interesting. Because when you first look at the recent import numbers, you might actually think, maybe he's got a point. Just look at this. Between June and September, India's imports of Russian crude dropped by 400,000 barrels a day. That's a pretty significant dip. At first glance, that looks exactly like a country winding down its purchases, right? It seems to line up perfectly with the claim.
So is that it then? Case closed? Is this data the smoking gun that proves India is quietly caving to pressure and cutting ties with Russia? Well, not so fast. Turns out, the real story behind these numbers has nothing to do with geopolitics. It's about something way more boring, but also way more practical: industrial engineering.
Yep, that's it. The drop in oil imports wasn't some big political statement. It was because several of India's major oil refineries had planned maintenance shutdowns. It's as simple as that.
It's easy to forget. These refineries are enormous, complex machines. They're running 24/7 under incredible heat and pressure. And just like your car, they need a tune-up now and then. They have to shut down for inspections and repairs to keep running safely. And in India, this is strategically timed right before the big festival season, when demand for fuel is at its absolute peak.
And here's the real kicker. This drop wasn't just about Russian oil. During this maintenance period, India's total oil imports from all of its suppliers fell by about 10 to 12%. So since Russia is their biggest supplier, the drop from Russia was the biggest in sheer volume, but it was just part of a market-wide trend driven by domestic needs. So the numbers tell a story of maintenance, not politics. But what about the official word from the government? Let's see how India's actual policy lines up with this whole narrative. Look, India's government has been crystal clear on this. Their entire energy policy is guided by one simple principle: the national interest. For them, that means doing whatever it takes to make sure their citizens have stable and secure energy. They buy from whoever gives them the best deal. It's a completely pragmatic, economy-first approach. And this really highlights a fascinating contrast in diplomatic styles, doesn't it? On one side, you have this claim, which feels like a demand, that India must stop. But on the other side, you look at Russia's public stance, and their ambassador has basically said, hey, India is a sovereign country, they make their own choices, and we respect that. Two global powers, two totally different ways of talking to India. This all feeds into India's larger strategy on the world stage, which, you have to admit, is a masterclass in walking a very, very fine line. Just look at where India gets its oil. Russia is number one, by a long shot. No debate there. But then look down the list to number 4, the United States. This isn't a story about choosing sides.
India's playing the entire field, buying oil from Russia, from the Middle East, and from the US all at the same time.
And that relationship with U.S. oil, it's not some straight line. As you can see here, the imports go up, they go down, they fluctuate. The idea that India is just ditching Russia to run to the U.S. just isn't backed up by the long-term data. It's a dynamic market, not a rigid political marriage.
So let's put all the pieces together. For India, cheap Russian oil is more than just a good deal. It's an economic lifeline to keep inflation under control. They simply can't afford to just turn off the tap. So instead, they play this careful game, balancing their relationships with both Russia and the West. And as for Prime Minister Modi staying silent on this, oh, that's no accident. That's a calculated diplomatic move to avoid getting pulled into a public spat.
So at the end of the day, all the evidence really points in one direction. India's energy strategy is being dictated by its own domestic needs and a very pragmatic view of the world market. It's a policy of India first, shaped by economics, not by pressure from anyone else. And that leaves us with one final thought. In a world of loud declarations and constant political pressure, India's government has chosen to respond mostly with silence. It really makes you wonder, in the high-stakes game of global diplomacy, when is saying nothing at all the most powerful move you can make?